Okay, this effect I'm going to show you is something I've actually been contacted by several people about to kind of find out how to do. And what we're going to be doing is creating sand going the correct direction around an island. So let's go ahead and start out with just a procedural terrain. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out so we can see that. I've also gone ahead and pulled out our preview window so it's a lot larger. And I want to keep with this same pretty much rough shape of this standard default terrain, and that is, if we open up the terrain editor, we can see this. We sort of have this mountain shape to it, which is going to be good for this sort of island we're going to be creating. So I can just close out of that. We're going to keep with this sort of idea. And what I want to do is I'm just going to use one of the presets that comes along with Vue and go up to our first tab up here and double click on our procedural terrain, or we can go to load material right here. It might be quicker if we just do that. And we are going to select a sand texture. So we need to go ahead and look for the soft dunes material, which is located under landscapes, and click OK. Now it's going to say that this operation will modify the mapping of the procedural terrain. We're going to click yes, and that way we keep the same shape that we had for our terrain. And now if you notice, we actually have our sand all going in one direction, which is good if you're doing sort of a desert or something along those lines where you need straight sand all the way across. And we can sort of see in the preview render that it's all kind of going across sort of this island, and that's not very realistic, and that's not exactly going to work if you want to create a realistic scene. Now this might even be a little large right now. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick preview render so we can take a look and see exactly how large the spacing is. We can tell that is pretty large, and it might be a little too big for what we're trying to achieve here. So I'm just going to hit escape to clear out that render, and I'm going to click on our procedural terrain, and I'm going to bring our scale down. Right now it's at 2.3. Well, I'm going to bring this down to 0.15, which should give us a lot less. And let's take a look. Yes, now we have our much tighter spacing in between our sort of dunes, or our ripples in the sand. Still notice it's all going the same direction. That's not what we're looking for. So I'm going to hit escape again, and we can cancel that render. And it's actually a very simple trick to actually change this so that it's all sort of radiating from sort of the center of our terrain outward. And that way we get that nice flow around the terrain of the sand dunes, or the ripples. So we're going to select that procedural terrain again and go ahead and make that quick change. I'm going to double click on our material. I want to make sure that we're in the advanced material editor and not in the basic material editor. And all we really have to do is go up to mapping and change it to cylindrical. And now that's going to change it for our distribution of our textures, but we still have to go in and actually edit our material 2, which is actually creating that bump, because right now we're distributing two materials, and we're under our mixed material type in our advanced material editor. And you can see we just have this light sand color, and then we also have our darker sand, which is giving the illusion of the ripples, and basically it's the bump map that's applied to this material too. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on material 2, and what we want to do is change the mapping on this to cylindrical, and then we can click OK. And now we have this material also cylindrical, along with the distribution. So we're mixing these two materials, and it's all kind of going the right direction. So I'm going to click OK. And now I want to do a quick render, kind of zooming in so that we can see sort of the direction that this is going. I'm also going to edit this render and make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to right mouse click on our little camera up here, so we bring up our render options. I'm going to set this to final, render to screen, and go 640 by 480, and click render. As you can see, now our sand is going the correct direction, and it's all sort of radiating around from the center. And now this isn't the best example because, of course, we have this rocky part of the terrain, but the smooth areas right here is exactly what we're looking for. And what we're actually going to be doing is taking another material and sort of mixing it with this one. And that way we can create our regular sort of island texture right here, where we're going to have grass and rock and things like that. And then have that sort of fade to our sand, and then I'll add a little bit of water so we can see that a little bit better as well. I'm going to go ahead and just close out this render. I'm going to zoom out here, and I'm just going to add that water really quick. So right mouse click, and that first button is our water. And I'm going to bring this down just a little. And of course we are still getting that sort of square look with our terrain. And that's because of the fact that our water is transparent. But of course it wouldn't be this transparent. We actually wouldn't be able to see that in real life if this island was actually to scale. So one quick thing I'm going to do is actually change the murkiness level of our water. And that way we'll only see sort of the underneath, the shallow parts of the water, sort of on the edges of just the terrain and not so much anywhere else. So I'm going to double click on our water texture, and I'm going to go to the transparency tab, and under fading out I'm going to change that to murky, and I'm going to bring it up a little bit higher, and it's kind of a guess, just at 77. Click OK and see if that comes close to what it is I'm looking for. We'll kind of zoom out and see if we still see that sort of square, and we don't, and actually that seems like it's going to be perfect, and that way we just get that little bit of shallow around there. And that's important just because you want to make sure that you have the right amount of murkiness on your level, and you might still see a little bit of that square in there, and that can be corrected by a couple of things. You could either change the murkiness if you think that maybe that's showing too shallow. You could raise the water level up a little bit, or you could apply that sand texture to the actual ground plane. But I'm just going to kind of leave it right now, and you can feel free to change that to whichever texture you want or whatever technique you want to use. And I'm going to come over here where it kind of stretches out a little bit thinner, and we get more of a nice looking terrain. And as you can see, the preview render doesn't exactly do it justice, but that's because of the weird effect that's going to be going on caused by the ripples. And unless you do a full render, you're really not going to see exactly what's going on in the scene. But once we have our base texture, we can go ahead and sort of add on our other texture that we want to use. And one thing I would suggest doing before we go ahead and change this is actually selecting our procedural terrain and even saving this edited texture, and that way you don't have to make those changes to it, to the material every single time you want to create this effect, and you can just have it in your library if you want. So what we can do is just right mouse click on our little preview up here, and we can click Save Material, which will allow us just to save this in here. And I'm going to say the soft dunes, so, and click Save. And now we'll have that texture saved, and we can go ahead and load that up for any of the scenes that we're going to be using or you're going to be using for your projects. And that way you don't have to go in and edit those bump maps and the distribution every single time. But now what we want to do is sort of create that separation between the sand and the actual land of the terrain, or the material for the land. And what we actually have to do is we're going to double click on this, and as you can see, we're already using a mixed material. So at this point, it's actually going to be kind of difficult to go and add another material to this. So what we actually want to do, since we saved that, what we can actually do is load in another similar material, depending if you want to do it custom or not. I'm just going to be using the presets because it's going to go a lot quicker to kind of show this effect. So what I want to do is actually clear out this current material, because we can go ahead and load that in as much as we want, and we want to sort of select a unmixed material, so that way we can kind of blend those together. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on our preview right here and actually load in a different terrain material, and I'm going to use the scrub line and click OK. And now we're set up with another mixed material, but I really just want the grass texture that's on here. And we're going to replace this first material, which is sort of this rock that's on here, with the sand that we have. So we'll go ahead and double click on that and double click on the second preview. And we can go to our personal materials and select that second dune texture that we made and click OK. And now I'm going to click OK again, and we can kind of see exactly where things are at. And you can see we don't exactly have the distribution that we're looking for. And we're going to kind of take a look and see what's going on. We'll go back, and our distribution of materials is set by a function. And what we actually don't want to do that, and we want to adjust our influences throughout the whole object. And I'm going to change our material just to set to 50 right now, and that way we can start sort of with our base object. And we do not want to distribute these with a function. So I'm going to edit function under that material, and I'm going to delete our combiner and delete our basic repeater node that we have on there and click OK. And now we're set with just that basic distribution, which is exactly what we're looking for, because we don't want them to sort of overlap into each other, at least not at this point. I mean, if you want that when you get sort of to the edges, you could easily add that. Now I want to click over here and see if we can get a preview of how it looks. As you can see, we're still very far away from that. We're going to make the influence of the altitude and kind of set these back to our default values, since we are using sort of a different texture. And if we're going from the ground up, it might be a little bit easier. And if we go over to the materials to mix, we can take a look and see that we have material 1 is the sand, material 2 is the grass, and under here it says material 2 appears rather on, and we're going to select steep slopes because we want the flat surfaces, the bottoms, to actually be that sand. And a material 2 appears at high altitudes, which is correct, so we can leave that where it's at. And we'll do click and create another preview, and you can see we're a little off now, so now we can adjust our slope and start bringing in sort of our texture, and just sort of playing around with it, seeing what works, and trying to bring in that texture and get that fall off that we're looking for. And we're starting to get it. The more we sort of bring that down, and we'll pull that up, make it a little bit stronger, and darken up that top area. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it right there, and we can go in and do a render sort of by that shoreline, because that's enough in there right now, and I'm not going to go ahead and play around with that too much because we don't really need to. Although our texture might be a little large, and we'll get a better idea once we go ahead and render this. Now, this isn't exactly the greatest example, but it does sort of show our sand is still kind of going around, and that we have the water meeting up to that. And it's mostly right now because of our position. It doesn't look exactly that great. Most of the position of the camera, because of the position of the lighting, it doesn't look real great on this side. And of course, with our grass, the way it's distributed, it doesn't exactly look perfect. But it does give you an idea of what it is you can do with that, and how you can expand upon that if you want to. And we can still sort of see the sand going underneath. Of course, that grass texture we have on there might be a bit large in comparison to our sort of sand texture that we have on there. So if we go ahead and take a look a little bit farther away, we'll edit the material, and what I'm talking about is the material 2. Material 1 is we changed it to 0.15, but we'd also want to change material 2 to a smaller amount, probably 0.1, and that way we don't have that large bump overall. Of course, this is a little bit easier when you're making a custom material, so if you want to go in and find out those exact function values, or just start out an entire material by yourself mixed material, that could be a little bit easier too. And that way you don't have to worry about some of the preset values in there that are kind of throwing it off, which is what we have here. Since we're using a preset, we don't exactly have full control over it because um, I don't want to take too much time kind of going through and sort of correcting what it is uh, that I'm looking for exactly. So you could just set up your own custom material if you want. And the easiest way, just to edit the material, and you can reset it. Double click and change that to a mixed material. Then you could go ahead and load in that soft dunes, that one we made. And click OK, and then grab that second one and load in any texture that you want to give sort of a variation on that, which is probably a better method anyway, because even this way you could use presets in a different manner. But that'll give you a full resetted um, sort of all of our tools there and settings, and that way you don't have to worry about editing what other people have done, and you can kind of set it up for yourself. So that's pretty much a quick little technique for creating our sort of islands with the correct sand going the right direction.